Rebecca, a man called out as he went on his knees, his voice filled with warmth she knew all too well. The diamond ring in his hand glistened under the daylight and a smile appeared on his lips as he popped the question, "Will you become my most beautiful masterpiece?" Overwhelmed with joy she said yes without hesitation, not knowing in truth what he really meant when he referred to her as his most beautiful masterpiece, something she will only realize too late. Hi guys, welcome back, it's Moonlite Recaps. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and I hope you enjoy this video. Believing it was love, she accepted his proposal that day. "Even if I died and were born again countless times, I will still choose to be your wife," that was her exact response. And from that moment, she became one of the art pieces Zeppelin collected. In a new scene, he placed a choker carefully around her neck and then complimented her afterwards. Then he turned to pick up another necklace from a tray, asking her what she thought about the second one, as he couldn't seem to choose since everything suited her so perfectly. However, without giving a definite response, she simply mentioned that she'd been invited to a party and asked if she could go. Her hand tightened around her chest as she admitted painfully that since their marriage she's hardly seen any of her friends and she'd really like to meet them again, but he suddenly cut her off with a sharp no. The gentleness faded off his face as he asked if she'd forgotten she was only allowed to attend parties he approved of. In response, she reminded him how he only allowed her to attend if he went with her, and even at that he didn't allow her to speak to anyone. He dismissed her and turned back to the maid, asking that she'd bring the next item while she could only bite her lip in agony. After their marriage, Zeppelin isolated her so she could meet no one. He made her live only as a doll dressed up beautifully for his eyes alone. Then one day, she got news that she was pregnant. That was the moment she realized if the child were to be born, it would end up placed in a display case just like her. Unable to stand the thought of her child living as a soulless doll, she fled. For the first time in her life, she worked with her own hands. Her once delicate hands grew rough and her face slowly began to lose its beauty, yet, she was happy. For the first time in so long, she'd felt freedom and she had a future to share with her child. But tragedy has a way of arriving at the height of happiness. On a particular night she laid in bed, and just as she slowly began to drift asleep, that was when it came, a familiar voice that now held an eeriness to it. She rose up immediately and turned to find Zeppelin in front of her. Like her naivety amused him, he let out a scoff, asking if she really thought he wouldn't find it, referring to their child. "At last, our masterpiece has been born." Immediately she turned around and called for Psyche. She grabbed onto Zeppelin and begged for knowledge of Psyche's whereabouts. However, he simply hit her hand off. He asked if she thought he would harm his own bloodline, reassuring her, in his words, he simply couldn't leave such a work of art abandoned in such a shabby place. With that, he glanced back at her before suddenly grabbing her chin and remarked, "To think it had already begun to wither before time." She pushed his hand away almost immediately and rushed to the door, calling for Psyche, and once she stepped out the door, and that was when she spotted her, Alicia, with her child in her arms. She called her name, barely able to contain her shock. She asked why she had Psyche and took slow but deliberate steps towards her as she asked if it was her after all. She had betrayed her despite how much she trusted her. Alicia, being pitiful, insisted that she had no choice, but Rebecca simply silenced her and asked that she hand Psyche over. Zeppelin arrived at that moment and grabbed her by her hair. Then he threw her to the floor, claiming, "It's clear the madam has already lost her mind," but it didn't matter anymore since he'd already found her replacement. He told her he'd be living then, as there was a duke's funeral he had to attend, but she ran after him asking that he give Psyche back. Annoyed, he shrugged her off, but that didn't stop her. The next time, she bit his hand and he screamed in pain. He stumbled backwards, clutching his hand and demanding to know how she dared leave a mark on his body. However, she simply steadied herself more as she wiped the blood off her lips. In anger, he admitted he had originally intended to spare her life out of respect for their years together. He locked her inside, declaring that she brought it upon herself, while she pounded on the door furiously, asking that he let her out. His next words left her stunned. "Rebecca, you were my finest doll, but I suppose it's time you were discarded. I've already taken what I wanted from you." And with that, the flames came. She thought she had escaped. Yet even in the end she couldn't break free from Zeppelin. She laid on the floor with tears in her eyes as she hoped for but a chance to return once more, then without fail, take revenge. Like her prayers had been answered, she opened her eyes to her maid asking if she's all right. The maid in front was Alice. She wondered why she was there as she knew for a fact that she had been killed by Zeppelin long ago. She wondered if it was heaven, but when her maid pulled the door open, she confirmed it for a fact. That was in fact not heaven, it was hell. She had for some reason returned to the past she so desperately wished for. The very day when everything was destroyed. The wedding of her husband and his second wife. It was a damnably beautiful and romantic wedding, but it was a shame that it was her husband's second. After they were declared husband and wife, he managed to catch a glimpse of her in the crowd and gave a cold order for her to smile. The color drained from her face in an instant. Seeing that look on his face, now it all feels real, she has really returned to the past. The first time she met Alicia was on her daily walking path. She couldn't just pass by seeing the serious state she was in, so she brought her back to the manor and nursed her with all her heart. When she awoke, she was so lovely that anyone would lose their heart to her. And the one who lost their heart was she as well. Lonely after losing contact with her friends after marriage, she brought her in as a maid, to keep her by her side. And after that, thanks to the gentle Alicia, she was no longer lonely. However, that gentle peace was shattered in less than a year, while they were having a meal to celebrate Alicia's birthday. She suddenly dropped her fork and complained that she couldn't eat. She was pregnant. The woman she had trusted and cherished was carrying her husband's child. She went to him and demanded an answer, asking how he could touch Alicia of all people, but he just responded, calling her naive. A beautiful man and woman met. Did you really think nothing would happen? This is not my fault, nor is it Alicia's. It is your fault for leaving such a beautiful woman in my care. She trembled as she forced herself to ask what he planned to do with her, and he simply raised a hand to his chin, asking if that hasn't turned out the best for them, since they've both been without a child for 10 years. And just like that, Alicia became Zeppelin's second wife. At that time she believed everything was her fault, but now she knows for sure, she now knows that none of that was her fault. Later that night she returned alone in her carriage with tears in her eyes. That horrible wedding was even more confirmation that she had indeed returned to the past. She instinctively reached for her belly, her previous child, Psyche. The memory of carrying her child for 10 years was still so vivid. Although it was brief, she clearly remembered the happy life they had. The soft checks and tiny wiggling hands. And their final moments. Rage boiled within her, but she quickly called herself back. Actually, it was for the best. Now, her child will never have to live a life like hers at Zeppelin's hands. I don't know the reason I returned to the past, but one thing is certain. Zeppelin Devonshire, now it's your turn to be ruined. I will ensure a different outcome from last time. Outside, a man emerged from the bushes with his assistant, and shortly after that a carriage passed and he was able to spot the lady in the carriage. But even more than that, he seemed to know her. Rebecca? A cat appeared the next minute. It got on his shoulder and without hesitation asked if he was perhaps interested in that woman. His answer was a sharp no. Rather, he thought she was like a corpse devoid of any emotion. He never knew she could make a face like that. The cat, however, suddenly asked if that wasn't a defiant look, leaving him stunned. He reminded Leo he'd asked him to stop reading his mind as he pleased, but the cat simply responded that he didn't wish to hear it, but he was broadcasting it. Knowing how the Count was usually so possessive of her, he couldn't help but wonder aloud why she was then returning home alone. He turned to Croa, his assistant, and demanded an explanation for the Count's presence within his domain. Since he was always engaged in war, it was understandable that he wasn't aware. Then Croa, visibly uneasy, informed him that the Count had taken a second wife and that the wedding had been held earlier that day along the Valeria coast. The assistant trembled as he awaited the reaction, and it came swiftly. His tone grew hoarse, like he was forcing down his anger while he questioned whether the Count had truly dared to perform such a disgusting act, hosting a wedding for a concubine within his territory, and doing so in the very location he cherished most no less. Coldness settled in his expression and he ordered that they were to be removed at once, and strict measures were to be taken to ensure the Count never set foot in his lands again. In a new scene, she steps out for some fresh air. She tried to recall what she was doing in the past around that time, but in truth, even though she was a countess, she never had a role in that manner. Even the duties that naturally belonged to the lady of the house, Zeppelin never entrusted them to her. In that manner, she was never more than anything but a pretty doll. She glanced to the side and spotted it. The Hall of Light, Zeppelin's most cherished place. The Devonshire family had long been famous for their deep appreciation of arts, and over the ages, they had collected priceless works of art. Even constructing buildings and controlling temperature and humidity just to preserve them, Devonshire's love for art was obsessive. At that moment, a thought struck her mind. What if I destroyed this place? What sort of face will Zeppelin make then? She simply smiled at the thought. It would be nice if she could, but with security that tightly destroying it is impossible, and right now, she has no power at all. If she had had a strong gaming behind her, she would have divorced long ago. But her family, the Obelia Viscountcy, went bankrupt not long after she got married, barely managing to survive by relying on Devonshire. Just as she strode, a person suddenly stretched an umbrella over her head. She turns around and finds her maid staring at her with a smile as she comments that the sun is a bit strong, asking her not to burn her skin. She offers a simple thank you and gratitude before resuming her stroll. Alice, the maid, was the only one in the suffocating Count's household who only truly ever thought of her. In her past life, on the day Alicia bore her second child, she took her to the village festival to cheer her up, and thanks to her she enjoyed a rare moment of happiness. But the price was too cruel. And so before her eyes she was beaten to death. She bore Alice a debt she could never repay. Now, she turned to Alice and asked if she had any wish, saying if it was something she could do she'll grant it. Her answer was simple. She admitted that her wish was simply to spend peaceful days like that with her. She pressed forward, asking her to tell her honestly, be it jewels or a higher pay, but she turned them all down, claiming she truly needed nothing at all. She simply wished to remain forever by her side. They headed inside together, and as she walked up the stairs, she noticed the third floor where Zeppelin's chamber and study are. He never allowed anyone near the third floor. From the manor's highest place he wished to look down on everyone, keeping them beneath him. The third floor held his chambers and study. No one was permitted to ascend there, including herself. His stuff was always locked right. And within it, she guessed maybe everything about the Devonshire household, and perhaps at least one weakness of his. She deliberately faked a sudden turn, and just like she guessed, almost immediately a guard appeared blocking her path. He reminded her she wasn't allowed there, and she just turned away, saying she knew. Once they arrived at her chamber, suddenly asked if she wished to visit the master's study, startling her. She reminded her how much her gaze was fixed on the third floor stairs and asked if she would like her help. This situation immediately drew her to the past, how she'd assured her if they simply slipped away like going to a festival, no one would notice. A bead of sweat settled on her cheek as she refused, nervously asking what will then happen if she perhaps gets punished for it, but her maid simply stated that the Count wouldn't return for a full week as he was on his honeymoon. The security was loose too, so right now was their chance, she urged. She brought up how only Hand was guarding the third floor, so she'll lure him to the kitchen, giving her enough time to sneak in. She winked at her, saying with the Count gone she must be so lonely and just want to read, so she should leave it to her. Her gaze softened and she called her name. She still feared for the incident of her past life, however she knew such an opportunity would almost never come again. So, she accepted. She entered the study thanks to Alice's help, the place she'd never once set her foot in even in her past life. She settled her candlestick carefully on a surface as she urged herself to find something that could serve as Zeppelin's weakness quickly. She went for the drawers first, and in there she found some documents. Without hesitation she picked them up to read it, and as she went through them she found the names of familiar houses. Particularly, the Obelia house. The documents contained records of how Zeppelin had been financially isolating Obelia years before he ever got married to her. She trembled as the weight of everything crushed her. Yes, she knew too well, her family might not have been a prestigious house, but they weren't a family that could collapse overnight. As if that wasn't enough, she found sworn statements from her friends. They all left her because Zeppelin had their weakness. When her father asked him for money, he'd bring it to her and ask how long he intended to depend on him. He'd tell her he could tolerate that much only because she was so obedient. When her friends refused her calls, he'll tell her they grew tired of her cause she could be irritating at times, but don't worry, you have me, all you need is me, Rebecca. She already knew Zeppelin was binding her, however, even those unrelated to her suffered because of it. Unable to take it anymore, she let out a scream and cursed him under her breath. However, the door of his study suddenly swung open, and once his gaze fell on her, he questioned through gritted teeth what on earth was going on. She grabbed a handful of the sheets and without hesitation threw them in his face, demanding to know just what he'd done to her. He didn't react to that, rather, he simply noted that her act was dangerous, asking what would have happened if the paper had cut her face. He picked up a document and with a carefree tone asked if she'd seen that, and then waved it off as nothing serious, which only seemed to infuriate her. She reminds he'd ruined her family and threatened her friends, asking if that to him isn't serious. The corner of his lips stretches into a smirk the next minute as he asks her to say it right, I did all of these for you. He pressed on, saying those friends were never people she should have been associating with anyway, they were not on her level, and for her family, it's a bit unfair. He pulled her in by her waist and then asked if he'd ever treat her, the one he treasures the most, in that way. He followed after that with a claim that he was only helping her father, reminding her he was the one who'd lent her father money when he was struggling. She struggled to get out of his grip as the thought lingered in her mind. In her past life she would have been easily fooled by those words, but just now, after reading those documents, she realized how he destroyed her family. He hired a con-man businessman to approach her father, then her father invested in the scammer and lost a great sum. Around that time Zeppelin appeared like a savior, he lent her father money with no strings attached. And her father, trying to recoup his losses, invested in another fake business set up by Zeppelin, and so the debt piled higher and higher until the Obelia family could no longer escape. She couldn't say her father was entirely blameless, but Zeppelin deliberately schemes to deceive them. Just then Zeppelin's voice came again. He told her he understood that she was rebelling because he took a second wife, but she better behave herself. Otherwise, Alice will be killed. She went stiff the next moment, unable to utter any words. He already knew her weakness. He reminded her to give him a response, and she forced a simple, I understand, and he in return agreed to turn a blind eye just that once with great generosity. Maybe it was from the shock of finding the documents, but she fell gravely ill starting the next day. On this particular day, when she opened her eyes, Alicia was beside her. Confused, she asked if she was the one who cared for her, and she responded saying yes, as she was worried something terrible had happened to her. Looking at Alicia, she reflected on how during her past life, because of that same warmth, she couldn't bring herself to hate Alicia. She had no idea that behind that smile leaked hideous, writhing desires, that gentle smile. Because of it in her past life she fell for Alicia's schemes time and time again. First it was jewels and dresses, and then she cut away all her allies, and in the end even her husband. She took everything away from her. When she escaped from the Count's house, if Alicia hadn't secretly opened the door for her, she could never have fled. That was why she believed, at least in some small way, Alicia truly cared for her. But in truth she only helped her because she covered the position of first wife. Noticing her silence, Alicia took this opportunity to shift into her premium green tea act. Her hand shifted nervously as she brought herself to ask the lady if she hated her. Rebecca responded with warmth, asking why she would act that way, but in truth she wondered what was with her absurd question. After everything, was she supposed to love her? She jumped to speak, pointing out that she was speaking to her formally again, something she didn't usually do. You hate me because I took the Count away from you, don't you? Just as practiced, her eyes welled up and she explained that she couldn't help it either. It was just like that past, the exact same words. A powerless maid cannot possibly refuse the count, can she? Something snapped within her and she cut her off. She reminded her that's why she'd given her another option. The day she found out Alicia was pregnant, she told her to run away. She even offered to get her a house and give her enough money to live on for the rest of her life. She snatched her hand away, claiming she was an adult too. Please stop treating me like a child. I will make the decisions about my child and my life. Now with furrowed brows she asks if she'd forgotten that was her choice. She throws her words back at her, asking that she take responsibility for her choice as an adult, just like she said. She asks that they end the conversation there, saying with things as they are, there's nothing good to come from being openly hostile. Our husband wouldn't like it either, and Alicia agreed too. As she walked she glanced back at her one time, thinking, fine. If you're blinded by greed, I'll indulge you. She thanked her for taking care of her and offered to give her a gift as compensation. She opened a jewel box and asked her to pick one from it, and just like she guessed, she spotted it quickly, but just as she reached to grab it, Rebecca suddenly snatched it. She questioned why that was there in confusion, explaining that it was an heirloom Zeppelin had given her, so she couldn't offer it as a gift, and instead asked her to pick something else. What level of greed is this, guys? Alicia, dissatisfied, asked if she could get one too, and then just as she'd planned, a smirk appeared on her lips as she explained that it was only possible for the Countess. I don't know if the second wife could receive one. That was her lesson to her: know your place, and learn not to desire what you don't have. Just then Zeppelin walked in. He walked straight to Rebecca, ignoring Alicia, who was standing beside her. Then as he examined her face closely, he mentioned he'll have to tell her to take care of her skin for the upcoming victory banquet. Alicia, hearing this, immediately beamed with excitement. She asked if it was a banquet meant for a party and stated that it'll be her first time at such a party, but she'll definitely need a dress. She asked Zeppelin what kind of dress would be nice, but he just let out a laugh at her naivety. He told her she didn't need to attend the banquet. She was confused, and he explained that it was hosted by the Emperor and there was no way she could attend. She was only a commoner after all. He offered to give her jewels as compensation, asking her to play with those and stay at home quietly. Then she asked for an heirloom too. Rebecca quickly explained that she had originally asked Alicia to pick out something as thanks for nursing her, but by mistake she ended up showing her the heirloom. The Count in frustration clarified that it was for the Countess alone, which meant only Rebecca could have it. She snapped, insisting she was Countess too, and they even had a proper wedding. He dragged her out to talk, but before they took their leave Rebecca stopped them with a question. But why did you two return so early from your honeymoon? Why else? Because our lofty Count here decided to sell off a villa to the Duke for nothing more than a few paintings, Alicia spat. In the end she was left alone in the room, with the name of the Duke of Johannes lingering on her mind. A smile appeared on her face as she thought. Duke Johannes and an imperial banquet. For once I'll be able to attend with genuine joy. In a new scene, she steps out fully dressed, ready for the banquet. She stood carefully as he walked towards her. Seeing her like that, it reminded Nah of his 17th birthday party. 17 years ago, during winter, he left his party celebration and stepped out. He muttered under his breath about how dull everything was, and like it was prescribed by fate he looked down and noticed her. A girl, with golden hair and the most pleasant smile. He was drawn to her that instant. She noticed him staring and flashed him a simple smile. That day, something in his monotonous life changed. For once he had a purpose. If I marry that woman, I wonder what a beautiful child we would create. Beauty is the meaning of life itself, therefore the beautiful Rebecca was the perfect doll to build his kingdom. Rebecca was smarter and much more stubborn than he expected, but now, she's a woman who knows only to look at him and depend on him. It was worth the decade he spent isolating her. And now that I've brought the young beautiful Alicia here, continue to compare yourself to her and cultivate your beauty. As long as you remain that beautiful and that obedient, you will be perfect, Rebecca. And once you bear a child who resembles me, my perfect kingdom will be complete. Later, at the Duke's manor, he asks for his assistance if he has any more useful stories. His assistant explains that storytellers who have caught the scent of money have been flocking there lately, and it'll take days just to filter out the strange ones. His assistant urged him to change his clothes at once, noting that the guest of honor couldn't be absent from the banquet. The Duke with a sigh simply responds, saying if he had known it would have been like that, he never would have gone to war. His assistant, however, pleaded with him to attend at least this time, saying he would be in deep trouble if he were to keep testing the emperor's patience like that. The Duke simply scoffed at his words. Deep trouble? What kind of trouble? As long as that damned goddess is watching over our family, not even the emperor can touch us. The noble Johannes duchy blessed by the goddess Defria. The goddess blessing that was said to protect the family was in fact a curse. Long ago, an ancestor of the Johannes who received a revelation from the goddess joined forces with the rebels at the civil war and stood at the vanguard. The new emperor who achieved a great victory under the goddess's protection was enthroned, and he bestowed the title of Duke upon Johannes, his greatest contributor. Temples praising the goddess Defria were built across the land, and the cat once considered unlucky became a symbol of the goddess Defria and an animal of good fortune. But perhaps it was the price for enjoying endless wealth and honor. The descendants of Johannes gradually forgot about their gratitude to the goddess and even committed acts of debauchery in her temple. Enraged by this, the goddess bestowed a curse instead of a blessing. You shall pay the price for the blessing you enjoyed for a pittance. Your child shall serve my child and treat it as one body. From then on, the children of Johannes were bound to the soul of a cat sent by the goddess, forced to share even their pain and emotion. The curse even took the children's lives. The cat sent by the goddess fed solely on the heir's divine power, and once all their divine power was consumed, they all died young. The ducal family, desperate to continue their line, married off their children at a very young age to continuously produce heirs. If the first wife could not beat a child quickly, they would bring in another wife. Julian was no exception. His father pointed out how he was born with the strongest divine power of any heirs in history. He urged him to produce heirs so that even if one died they could continue to protect the goddess's sacred beasts. But he firmly refused, asking his father if he was asking him to keep dragging innocent women into that curse. His father didn't urge him any further, instead he simply stated, "You might feel that way now, but you too will soon realize that you cannot escape this curse." His mother's words, however, were different. She warned him never to fall in love. After his mother's death, his father brought a new woman and introduced her to him as his new mother. Thus he lived like that till now. Marry as soon as possible? How absurd. I refuse to simply surrender to that wretched fate. But if I fail to produce an heir, then Lily's child will be the one to inherit this curse. There has to be a way. This curse ends with me. On the other hand, Rebecca arrived at the banquet hand in hand with the Count. She glanced around, checking to see if that person had arrived yet, only to hear them suddenly announce his presence. Upon his arrival, he was immediately commended on his good work with the war by the Emperor. He thanked him, however, the Emperor didn't waste any time and introduced him to a lady, Princess Catherine. But the Duke simply scoffed inwardly. His intentions were so blatant he regarded him as an old fool. Over the years, the Empire of Rotandus had grown so entangled with the Church's authority that it was beyond repair. Most of the high nobility belonged to the Pope's faction, and the people's fate was wholly on the Church's side. Even the Council of State's policies were treated as a mere draft until the Cardinal or a Pope reviewed them. Unlike his predecessor, the current emperor was working to strengthen the imperial power, and he could see right through his schemes to use the blessed Duke Johannes. Julian Johannes, a Casanova with depraved and filthy tastes, but even so, with his own daughter? He glanced at their hands as the emperor asked if he wouldn't share his first dance with the princess. He would have refused, but when it came down to checking the temple, there was no better ally than the emperor. So, he asked her to dance. As they danced, he meticulously considered the whole situation. If he were to marry a princess, even the temple wouldn't dare demand he take another wife. But he couldn't drag an innocent woman in his problems and make her suffer the same fate as his mother. On the other hand, Rebecca snuck a glance at the Duke dancing with the princess, but before her eyes could linger on the pair any longer, the Count suddenly grabbed her face, demanding that she look at him. She offered a soft apology, saying she'd felt a bit dizzy, and he took that to lecture, saying she must conduct herself properly in such spaces. Everyone needed to see that she belonged only to him. She smiled in agreement, but inside, all she felt was disgust. After their dance, he took her to a corner and asked her to stay out. His intention was obvious, a trip to the corner, but at least that gave her a chance. The Duke also stood at a corner, taking a break from the exhausting interaction, only for a voice to suddenly startle him. "I don't see the cats today." His expression quickly changed. He hadn't expected someone to follow him all the way there, so he turned to walk away, only for the person to shock him once more. This time she mentioned Leo, the cat that shares his soul, and asked, "The rest are just decoys to cover it up, aren't they?" He called her words nonsense, but she quickly cautioned him not to make it obvious he was speaking to her, as she was being watched. He asked for her identity, however she simply skipped the small talk, and revealed that she knew how to break his curse. He tried to play dumb, demanding to know how she dares spout such nonsense about a blessed ducal house, but she only pressed further. She revealed that she knew everything, that if the cat tied to his soul died, he'll die as well, and that he was gathering storytellers to find a way to break the curse that's been passed down for generations. The Duke simply let out a sigh. He wasn't letting his guard down, rather he wondered who'd sent her, maybe the Emperor or perhaps Latranis, but her next words left him completely dumbfounded. "Then how about this? The infamous perverted womanizer Duke, who is actually untouched. You hide it behind endless scandals, but in truth you've remained pure, haven't you? Of course that's only natural for someone who never wished to leave behind an heir. This time the opportunity you've always wanted, you won't let it slip through your fingers now, would you?" He asks what she wants, and she responds, saying if he danced with her she'll tell him. "But it must be when everyone is watching. You just ask me to dance in front of the Emperor." Noticing she already taking her leave, he hurriedly asked for her name, and she responded, "Rebecca. I'll be waiting." The unsuspecting Count arrived and apologized for keeping her waiting, claiming Duke Latranis wouldn't stop pestering him. He glanced up and noticed the Duke and immediately pressed him for being insolent, to look at another man's wife like that. The Duke gently set down his glass as he threw in a fickle apology, as he explained that his presence was so faint that he'd barely even noticed him. His response only infuriated the Count further. He cursed him in silence. "Julian Johannes, this bastard, even when we first met, he dared to speak to me in such a way. That arrogant air, as if he's the only one who matters, and I hated it. Though I'll admit he has quite an eye for beauty, but Rebecca will be mine. Rebecca is my greatest masterpiece. Someone like him could never lay a claim to her." The noble ladies around gushed over the Count's jealousy, praising him for being so tender towards his wife, but another lady quickly countered then by asking what good it was anyway. She was practically locked up in that mansion. At the same time, the Duke walked up to the Count, who asked if he had anything more to say. His words were precise. "To you? No. My business lies with her." Then, he went ahead and asked Rebecca to dance. The look on the faces of the nobles present was priceless. While Rebecca herself was stuck in a daze as she pondered on how before her regression she'd rarely ever encountered him, so she didn't know. Even when she suddenly suggested a deal, he carried himself with such composure. He certainly was no ordinary man. At that moment the Count suddenly grabbed her shoulder, demanding she refuse the Duke, as he wasn't worth her time. Just then the Emperor's laughter filled the room. He remarked that the Count clinging too much to his wife wouldn't look so good on her. He explained that the Duke had been rude, but the Emperor Simony cut him off, saying he'd see no rudeness on the Duke's path. He asked if he hadn't already had the first dance with her, and then turning towards Rebecca he mentioned that he'd heard she hadn't ever once danced with another man, so once shouldn't hurt at all. The Emperor thought differently. It was merely a game of weaknesses for him, for the great Duke Johannes to cover another man's wife. If I play this right, this could become his weakness. The nobles immediately began to speak, pointing out how she'd also stopped conversing with others suddenly after her marriage. She was never like that before. The count must have bound her too tightly. Finally, under the pressure from the nobles, he agreed. But the duke simply scoffed, replying that it's funny as he never asked the count's opinion, he was only asking the lady in front of him. Rebecca accepted, but not without first glancing back to check the reaction of the count. He went straight to the point and asked what the deal she mentioned was, and she without hesitation revealed she was filing for divorce. Therefore, please marry me. He asked her to clarify herself, and she explained that soon pressure will come from the temple as they'll demand he take a wife. He asked where she heard that, but she simply flashed him a polite smile saying the source doesn't matter as it had no bearing on their contract. She wasn't asking him to fall in love with her. Simply put, I want us to be husband and wife, in name only. With a smile he asked if that's truly all she wants, and she says yes. She only needs one thing. Give me the power to bring down House Devonshire. She leaned forward and whispered the rest in his ear, in return, I will save you. He asks how he's supposed to believe that, but she just tells him he will have to, not if he wished to rescue his little sister from the curse. The duke's eye immediately widened, he couldn't believe she knew about Lily too. And most importantly, her eyes, she didn't seem to be lying. Just who is this woman? She lowered herself to a gentle bow as she ended, saying she didn't expect him to answer right that moment, but once he's made his decision, he should send Leo to the court's estate. Her chamber was on the east wing of the second floor, and she'll place a yellow flower by the window. She'll be awaiting his reply. Just then the count emerged again, even more upset than before. He pulled her outside the hall, and once they got outside shoved her into the carriage, insisting she'll take her leave right that moment. She responds with a simple word, understood. He snapped at that moment. He asked what exactly she understood, if she enjoyed herself flirting in another man's arms. He shut the door of the carriage, asking her to sit quietly at home where she belonged, noting she'll pay for that night's disgrace. He watched the carriage leave in the distance when he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. He turned to the duke and warned him to learn not to covet that which belongs to another man, but the duke responded calmly, asking how she belonged to him. She wasn't an object. That only enraged the count. The duke didn't stop. Instead he asked what was wrong, if he wanted him to treat him like some old man, saying he supposed age is the only thing he could boast of, and asked for a chance to address him properly. Uncle Count. His cats arrived right on time, but he simply said a few words to calm them. He may be a bad man, but if we cause a scene here it'll only harm us, he explained. Cornered, he simply turned away, but not without warning him not to approach Rebecca again, noting she was his wife, his possession. In the distance he sneezed repeatedly, and at the same time the duke's assistant arrived, asking what he was doing there. But the duke only called his name. He told him it seemed he was going to marry, and his assistant instinctively said his congratulations, but he suddenly stopped halfway, exclaiming in shock as he realized what that meant. But that wasn't the only words that would shock him, as the duke continued. Though, the problem is, the bride is already married. That night she waited on her bed awaiting the count. Noticing Alice's silence, she pointed out how she was her usual chattering self today and asked if she wasn't curious why she returned from the banquet early. Her maid finally asks what had happened. Her lips curl into a smile and she responds, saying she danced as the emperor personally commanded it. Alice asked how it was, saying she'd heard the duke was a wonderful man and she wished she could have seen that sight, but when her lady finally glanced back at her, her chattery stopped. At the same time they heard the count's voice from outside her room calling her. He burst in only to immediately find her on her knees. He commented that it seems she knows what she did wrong, but that won't make it as though it never happened, and immediately reached for a whip. How much humiliation he had to endure, he insisted she must take responsibility for failing. The thought of Alice dying the way she did in her past life occurs to her, and she immediately drops to her knees, clinging to Zeppelins, apologizing over and over and promising never to look at another man again. She admits it was her mistake and begs him to stop, and in response he simply flashes her a grin and tells her she should have done that from the start. He crouched down, muttering on and on about her beauty. "You're so beautiful that pests keep swarming you. In the future, if a man like that clings to you, you'd better refuse him, understood? My lovely wife." He turned around staring. Since Rebecca was defiled, he'll have to go to Alice's room, ordering them to heal the maid and bathe Rebecca. Once he left, she wiped the performative tears in her eyes and immediately turned to Alice to check on her, but as she held her close her voice suddenly dropped. "But why did you smile when the Count raised his whip?" "I asked why you smiled. Answer me." The day Zeppelin urgently entered the study was when she began to suspect Alice. That day, the minute Zeppelin came rushing back, he ran straight to the study without a movement's hesitation. What could have made a man who never hurries rush in so desperately? The only variable that occurred in the mansion was my actions. And the only person who knew that fact was Alice. When she thinks about it, it's strange she never suspected Alice before. Zeppelin would immediately fire or send away any maid she grew even a little attached to. He didn't want her to have a single person on her side, but Alice was different. She was the maid who had been with her since the first day she came to the Count's estate. And if she had thought a little more, she would have known that was only possible because she was one of Zeppelin's people, but her judgment was clouded by the fact that she sacrificed her life for her. But now, even with that sacrifice, she can't help but wonder what her purpose was. She realized her grip around her neck and gave a cold order for her to run away. She sat in confusion, but Rebecca helped her understand. She's already lost her trust, so she was aware what Zeppelin would do to her, so she'll give her one last chance. She revealed to her she'll inform Zeppelin to fire her the next morning, so she should run away before dawn. Alice clenched her fist. She knew already that she found out and couldn't get past how naive and foolish the Countess was, that she wondered if she didn't even have the courage to take care of a traitor. She didn't like it. She dropped her act and as she slowly got up asked if she wasn't even going to ask her why. Rebecca responded flatly, saying knowing why wouldn't change anything, so she should only hurry and run, but her maid only mattered that she's always been that way. She had everything, but she didn't know how to enjoy it. If she thought someone chooses to be born to poor parents, I heard your family was insignificant too, you should simply be grateful that the Count took you in. Rebecca responded with a question, asking if she was really saying that after seeing what she's been through, but her maid just asked what it is she was so dissatisfied with. The Count adored her. He gave her so many jewels and dressed her up beautifully. Do you know how many times I've thought I wish I was you? So you don't even lose to some mistress. Rebecca warned her to keep quiet, telling her she could end her life right at that moment, but Alice simply scoffed. She pointed a finger at her, urging her to go and kill her. In her words, she couldn't kill her because she's always been the naive and kind Countess. She asked her to stop with the hypocrisy, however she didn't notice the maid from before beside her until she smashed the bowl on her head, knocking her unconscious. Then she turned to the lady and informed her bath was ready. She pulled Alicia out by her hair, leaving Rebecca, who alone in the room, immediately dropped to her knees. She'd given her a chance until the very end. Now it was all over, and that maid just now, she must have been one of Zeppelin's people. She worried about what would happen to Alicia now, but for her it was clear. Now she's completely alone. There was no one on her side anymore. The maid who said the bath was ready never returned even as the night wore on. She finally picked herself up and, staring into the darkness of the night, she swore that she would become unbreakable. She will become hard enough to shatter rock. She had nothing left to lose, that's why she can now do anything. On the other hand, once Alicia awoke and realized her surroundings, that familiar statue, the basement, she immediately pleaded for her life, but right at that moment Zeppelin appeared with a cold order for her to be silenced. He praised the new maid and promised to give her whatever she wished if she did well, but he made sure to warn her of her fate if she happens to overstep her bounds. He informed her that starting tomorrow she'll become Lady Rebecca's maid and asked her to report everything to him, her heart, her words, her gestures, the look in her eyes, everything. Then he ordered them to take Alicia's body away and turned away after. But there was something he didn't notice in the maid's eyes. The next morning she awoke to Manna's voice. She informed her she'll be serving her from now on. Realizing it was the maid from the previous night, she was surprised they'd found a replacement really quickly, but even more than that, she recalled amongst the maids who passed through her last life there was no one called Kanna. Could the future have changed? Her skills were flawless, Alice was clumsy in so many ways. She wondered what would have happened if the new maid had informed Zeppelin that she found out about Alicia's identity, but the maid suddenly announced, "Alicia is dead." She continued in one tone, revealing the Count was aware of the details of what happened the previous night, and before she could finish, Rebecca grabbed her hand demanding to know what was happening. She asked if Zeppelin had ordered her to try and win her favor like that, informing her now it was useless. She advised her to run now, seeing how Alicia ended, but instead the maid simply went down on her knees and extended a handkerchief, something she treasured dearly, more than her own life. She handed it to Rebecca and immediately she recognized it. It was proof that she had once saved her life. That day was a warm spring, however, for her, it was colder than ever. Her father had intended to sell her off to a brothel to pay off his gambling debts. The moment she crossed the door of that place, she felt that if she entered that place she would never be able to leave again. So she fled. However, she was almost hit by a horse and fell to the ground, and that was when she heard the voice. Gentle, filled with warmth than she'd ever known, asking if she was okay. She stretched her hand, but just as she was about to take it she heard her father's furious roar and stopped. The lady, catching up to something, picked her up without hesitation and asked that she be taken to the Liberta Relief Shelter. While they sat in the carriage, she asked about the person who'd called her name, but she noticed her hesitation. She stopped and searched her purse. She pulled out a handkerchief, explaining that even if it was made by someone else, it will serve as a temporary solution. She informed her about the place they were heading to and assured her only good people were there, and made a promise to ensure the person who screamed her name never comes near again. It was the first time in her life she'd felt such a warm touch. Although after entering the shelter she could never see the lady again, she never forgot that touch. With the sole wish of seeing Lady Rebecca once more, she has ended until now. Not once had she forgotten her. She burst into tears. Now she finally got to see her again. She assured her it didn't matter whether or not she had forgotten her, but as long as she could be happy she'll do anything. She remembered at that moment, she originally made it and intended to give it to Zeppelin as a gift, but he simply called it awful trash and threw it to the floor. She asked her to use her. She told her if she ordered her to kill the Count she will, if she asked her to break the spy's leg she would. All she wanted was to be by her side. She rose up, declaring that it didn't matter. Now she was on Zeppelin's side, but Jana tried to explain. However, she insisted she must be someone in Zeppelin's side. Then she offered her an option. If you want to help me, gain Zeppelin's trust and become my eyes and ears, if necessary even my feet. But before that you'll have to prove that you're on my side. Bring me a lock of Zeppelin's hair, and if you cut it messily, even better. She agreed, asking her to leave it to her, and she accepted, asking her not to betray her. At that moment they heard precise, gentle taps on the glass and both turned their heads to find Leo, the Duke's cat, sitting there. She ordered Kanna to go outside and afterwards let Leo in, asking how long he's been waiting, but the cat simply stretched. Then when she opened the tiny box it carried around its neck, she found a note from the Duke that said, "For now, let's meet and talk." How do you think Zeppelin would react when she leaves him for the Duke? Like and follow for more, and also, thank you guys for watching.